The search party had been looking for Dr. Yara for 11 days before someone thought to ask if she wanted to be found. This was, in retrospect, an obvious question. It was also, in retrospect, the kind of question that should have been asked on day 1 rather than day 11. After the Concordance Survey Authority had deployed 3 aerial drones to ground teams and 1 very expensive satellite, retasking to locate a single human xenobiologist who had walked into the Vareth jungle on a Tuesday morning and had not walked out. The reason the question took 11 days to surface had to do with assumptions. Specifically, with the assumption that a human walking into the Vareth jungle alone, without a guide, without the standard survival escort that the Survey Authority required for all researchers entering Class 4 biomes, and against the explicit written advisory of the Kareth Field Station's senior safety officer, was a human who had made a catastrophic error in judgment and was now suffering the consequences. The Vareth jungle was a Class 4 biome for specific reasons. It covered approximately 3 million square kilometers of the planet Kethvar's equatorial continent. It had an average canopy height of 60 meters, which reduced ground-level light to approximately 8% of surface levels and made aerial observation nearly useless below the upper canopy. It had no clear trails, no reliable landmarks, and a topography that the Survey Authority's own mapping teams described, in the technical language of people who had suffered through it personally, as aggressively inconsistent. The terrain changed character every few 100 meters. Dense undergrowth giving way to open floor, giving way to swamp, giving way to rocky outcrops, giving way to dense undergrowth again, in patterns that the current maps rendered accurately at the macro scale and almost useless at the ground level. It had fauna that occupied every threat category from inconvenient to genuinely lethal. It had a microclimate system that produced localized weather events with insufficient warning to reliably shelter from them. It had, in the Survey Authority's records, absorbed 17 researchers over the past 30 years. Of those 17, 12 had been recovered. 5 had not. Dr. Yara Assay was, by all available metrics, the least qualified person to enter it alone. She was a xenobiologist, not a survival specialist. Her field experience was extensive in the academic sense and limited in the practical one. She had spent 7 years studying the Vareth jungle's ecosystem from the safety of the Kareth Field Station, conducting long-range observations, analyzing samples brought in by the survey teams, building a comprehensive theoretical model of the jungle's biological systems. She had, in the safety officer's words, never actually been in the jungle. She had been adjacent to it, which was a completely different thing. The safety officer had put all of this in the written advisory that Assay had signed, indicating she had read and understood it. She had signed it on a Monday. On Tuesday morning she had walked in the jungle with a field a deacon, and new escort. By Tuesday afternoon, when she had not returned for the scheduled check-in, the search had begun. 11 the search teams covered estimated 40% of the jungle's accessible ground area, found no trace of Assay, and were beginning to discuss the kind of search status change that nobody wanted to discuss. That was when Field Commander Rethvar, who was leading the ground teams and who had been in the Survey Authority's search and rescue division for 19 years and who had, therefore, developed the particular skepticism of someone who had seen to many situations that looked obvious turn out not to be, asked the question, "Has anyone," he said, "verified that she is actually lost?" His team looked at him. "She has been in the jungle for 11 days without communication," his deputy said, carefully. "We have found no trace of her. We have no signal from her equipment." "We have. I know what we have," Rethvar said. "What I'm asking is different." He looked at the jungle, which began approximately 20 meters from where he was standing and which had the specific quality of very large things that contain everything and reveal nothing. Has anyone considered that she might be in there deliberately and not in distress? His deputy was quiet. She is a xenobiologist, Rethvar continued, who spent 7 years studying this jungle from outside it, who walked in alone, against advisory, with a field pack and data collection equipment. He paused. What if she went in to collect data? His deputy said, for 11 days. For as long as it takes, Rethvar said. He pulled out the communication protocols and found the frequency assigned to Osei's field equipment. Then he opened a channel, which was something that the search teams had been doing on a rotating basis since day one with no response, and said something different from what they had been saying. Dr. Osei, this is Field Commander Rethvar, Search and Rescue. I'm not asking for your location. I'm asking if you need assistance. He waited. The jungle produced the sounds that jungles produce. Winding canopy animal calls at various distances. The ambient biological noise of 3 million square kilometers of extremely active ecosystem. Then a voice came back, clear and unhurried, and carrying the specific quality of someone who has been absorbed in work and is mildly surprised by the interruption. Field Commander, thank you for the different framing. She paused. I'm not in distress. I apologize for the communication gap. I've been keeping radio silence to avoid disturbing the fauna. Are you able to hold the search for approximately more days? The field station control room, where 17 people were monitoring the search communications, went very quiet. For muddy days, Rethvar repeated, Yes, I found something significant and I'm in the middle of documenting it. She paused. I would also appreciate if you could hold my coordinates when I transmit them, rather than dispatching a team. The approach corridor is very sensitive and I don't want it disturbed. Rethvar looked at his deputy. His deputy looked back at him with the expression of someone who was revising several assumptions simultaneously. Dr. Osei, Rethvar said. Can you tell me what you've found? A brief pause. Then, I'll send you the preliminary data. But the short version is that the current maps of the Vareth jungle are significantly wrong in ways that explain several things that the Survey Authority has been confused about for 30 years. She paused again. I've been fixing them. Yara, Osei had grown up in Kamosi, Ghana, which was a city of significant size and complexity on a continent that had spent 3,000 years teaching people to read landscapes. Her grandmother had been a botanist. Her mother was a geologist. Her father had been, until he retired, a ranger in the Kakum Conservation Area, which was a tract of tropical forest in southern Ghana that bore certain relevant similarities to the Vareth jungle in terms of canopy density, terrain consistency, and the genre to disorient people who did not know how to read it. She had been walking in forests since she could walk. Not the kind of walking that involved trails and markers, and the clear implication that someone had been here before and had thoughtfully indicated the way, the other kind. The kind that required you to read the forest itself, to understand it as a text written in root systems and water flow and light angles, and the specific signatures that different biological activity left in soil and vegetation. Her father had taught her this the way his father had taught him, which was by doing it together until she could do it alone. And then by making her do it alone until she was certain she could, and then by making her do it alone in conditions that tested that certainty. She had been alone in the Kakum for 5 days, when she was 14. Her father had dropped her at a specific point and told her to be at a different specific point in 5 days, and had been there when she arrived. Which was the way she had understood that she had passed something. She had not told the Survey Authority's safety officer any of this, partly because it was not relevant to the standard safety assessment and partly because she had learned over the years that mentioning specific human experiences with tropical forests to beings whose species had evolved in very different environments tended to produce skepticism rather than reassurance. She had simply signed the advisory, which was accurate as far as it went, and walked into the jungle. The first 3 days she had spent getting her bearings. Not in the sense of orienting herself. She had known where she was within acceptable precision from the first hour. In the sense of learning the jungle's specific character. The way its particular ecosystem organized itself, the patterns that underlay what appeared to be chaos, the readable text beneath the apparent noise. The Vareth jungle, she had determined by day 2, was not organized the way the Survey Authority's maps said it was. This was not a minor discrepancy. The maps were not wrong about the jungle's location or its general extent or the broad features that were visible from satellite or aerial observation. They were wrong about what was underneath the canopy, which was, when you were in the jungle, the only thing that mattered. The maps showed the jungle as broadly homogeneous below the upper canopy, which was the kind of conclusion that made sense if you were looking at it from above and could not see what was happening at ground level. What was actually happening at ground level was considerably more structured than homogeneous. The jungle had zones, not the kind of zones that appeared in the maps. Biological zones, organized around water systems that the current maps had incompletely recorded, and soil chemistry variations that produced distinct vegetation communities, and specific fauna distribution patterns that made sense only if you understood the zone structure they were moving through. The zones had boundaries. The boundaries were readable if you knew what to read. By day, for she had mapped on the ground the zone structure of approximately 40 square kilometers. By day 7, she had extended this to 200 square kilometers and had identified the master organizing principle, a system of underground water channels that surfaced periodically and shaped everything above them, that the survey authorities' geological surveys had detected traces of and had not understood the significance of. By day 9, she had understood the organizing principle well enough to navigate by it. The zone boundaries told you where you were. The water channel signatures told you which direction you were going. The fauna density patterns confirmed both. Once you could read these things, the jungle was not a featureless labyrinthine mass. It was a map. She had been following it and simultaneously transcribing it for 11 days. The 4 things she had found that she was currently documenting were the reason she had asked for more days. The first was a species of ground fauna that the survey authorities' records showed as extinct for 200 years. It was not extinct. It was living in a zone that the current maps showed as impassable swamp, which it was, if you approached it from the directions the maps indicated. From the direction she had approached it, following the zone boundary, it was navigable if wet. The fauna was there, in numbers that suggested a healthy population. She had 17 hours of observation data and specimens for genetic confirmation. The second was a vegetation community unlike anything in the survey authorities' records. Occupying a kilometer-wide zone around the deepest of the underground water channels, she had taken samples from 4 to 3 distinct species. At least 6 of them were unknown to the Concordance's botanical databases. The third and fourth things she had found were more complicated to explain quickly. She sent the preliminary data to Field Commander Rethvar and went back to work. The field station's senior researcher, a Karathri named Commander Vessal who had been studying Kethvar for 12 years, reviewed the preliminary data for 6 hours. At the end of 6 hours, she called a meeting of the station's full scientific staff, which was 11 beings of 4 species, and presented the data without commentary. The meeting lasted for hours. The conclusions were, across the scientific staff, consistent in their essentials and varied only in the emotional register with which different species processed the same information. The pill scientists were excited in the contained, precise way of beings who had found a significant anomaly and were immediately thinking about methodology. The Horian researcher was very quiet and then said, "This changes the framework for 30 years of survey data." The Plenary Junior researcher said, If the zone structure is as she describes it, the distribution patterns for 17 endemic species need to be completely reclassified. Commander Vessal said nothing for a long time. She looked at the preliminary map overlay that Assay had transmitted, showing her ground-mapped zone structure superimposed on the current official maps of the Vareth jungle. The two maps agreed at the macro scale. Below that, they were different documents. Then she sighed. How long has she been in the field? 11 days, her deputy confirmed. Alone? Yes. Vessal looked at the map. She spent 7 years, analyzing data from outside the jungle. She said slowly, this is what she was building toward. She paused. She needed to go in because the data she needed to test her model didn't exist yet. She had to generate it herself. Her deputy said she should have had a team. The protocols assume that the researcher does not know the environment, Vessal said. She cut off her deputy's response with a gesture. I am not saying the protocols are wrong. I am saying that they were not designed for this situation. She looked at the map again. She knew that jungle. Not from being in it. From 7 years of building a model of it so detailed that she could enter it and navigate by the model. She paused. She tested the model by going in, Vessal said. And the model was accurate enough that she has been in there for 11 days and is not lost, and has found for significant discoveries, one of which is a species we thought was extinct. The room was quiet. Field Commander Rethvar wants to know whether to maintain the search suspension, her deputy said. Tell him to maintain it, Vessal said. Then pull every dataset we have from the last 30 years that references the Vareth jungle's interior ground conditions. She paused. When, Doctor? Assay comes out. I want to be prepared to understand what she's going to tell us. She came out on day 15, not day 14, which was when she had said for more days, but day 15, which meant she had found something on day 14 that required one more day to document properly and had made the decision to take it. She emerged from the jungle at a point that was, according to the field station's tracking of her transmitted coordinates, approximately 8 kilometers from the point she had entered, which was not the same point but which she had clearly intended, because she came out on the field station's south perimeter road at a location that put her within 5 minutes' walk of the main building. She was, by the field station's subsequent medical assessment, in reasonable physical condition. She had lost some body mass, which was expected after 15 days of field nutrition. She had a collection of minor injuries consistent with 15 days of movement through dense jungle. She was dehydrated in a way that the medical staff said was not dangerous, but was worth addressing. She was also carrying, in addition to her field pack, a secondary collection vessel that had not been part of her original kit, which she had apparently constructed in the field from materials she had found in the jungle, and which contained, according to her field notes, specimens from 11 of the 6+ unknown species she had identified, live specimens from 3 of them. Field Commander Rethvar met her at the perimeter road. He was a search and rescue specialist with 19 years of experience. He had found people in jungles before. He had developed, over those 19 years, a reliable sense of what people looked like when they came out of places that had been hard. Assay did not look like someone who had been in a hard place. She looked like someone who had been in a place she understood. Dr. Assay, he said. Field Commander, she said, and shifted the secondary collection vessel to her other hand to shake his. Thank you for holding the search teams. I appreciate the patience. He looked at her. She met his eyes with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who was not performing composure. She was simply composed. Are you all right? He said, yes. She said, I'm very well. Actually, she paused. I found a lot more than I expected to. That's why day 14 became day 15. I apologize for the extra day. He looked at her for a moment. "Then you were never lost." "No," she said. She said it without defensiveness, without apology, simply as a fact. "I knew where I was the whole time." How? She looked at the jungle edge, 12 meters away. And for a moment her expression shifted into something that was less composed and more genuine. The specific expression of someone who loves a thing and is looking at it. "She reads," she said, "if you know what to read." The debrief with the field station scientific staff lasted 3 days. Not because Assay was slow. Because the data she had collected was dense enough that unpacking it properly required the full attention of 11 scientists and a great deal of time. The preliminary map she had transmitted was expanded into a full ground-level zone map covering 800 square kilometers of the jungle's interior, which was the area she had covered in 15 days. The zone map resolved immediately. 3 navigational anomalies that had been in the Survey Authority's operational records for decades. Specific areas where search teams had consistently become disoriented, where survival beacons had produced unreliable location data, where the aerial drone surveys had shown vegetation patterns that did not match the ground conditions found by ground teams. The anomalies resolved because the zone map explained them. The areas where teams became disoriented were zone transition zones, places where multiple biological communities overlapped, and where the visual and navigational cues that worked in one zone gave conflicting information in the adjacent zone. The beacon location data had been unreliable because the signal propagation was affected by the water channel geometry, which the zone map now fully documented. The aerial-ground discrepancies were a function of the canopy being organized by different principles than the ground below it. The zone map did not just explain historical confusion, it made the jungle navigable. Commander Vessal looked at the completed map for a long time. "This took 15 days, she said. "One person, without a team," Assay said. "I had the model already." The 15 days was testing and transcribing. "How long did the model take?" 7 years, Assay said. Vessal looked at the map. "You've been building this for 7 years, she said slowly. "The survey data, the aerial observations, the sample analyses. You were constructing a predictive model of the jungle's interior structure from external data." "Yes, and the model was accurate enough that you could enter an environment you had never physically been in and navigate it without disorientation. The model needed validation," Assay said. "That was the purpose of going in." She paused. "I could not validate it from outside." Vessal nodded slowly. She looked around at her staff, at the Pill researchers, whose 6 eyes were fixed on the zone map with expressions of focused scientific hunger, at the Horian researcher who was working through 30 years of survey data against the new framework, with the absorbed attention of someone rewriting a very long document, at the junior plenary who had stopped saying anything an hour ago because she was too busy calculating species distribution reclassifications to talk. She looked at Assay. "What are the 4 significant finds?" she said. "You mentioned 4. The preliminary data showed the presumed extinct fauna and the unknown species. What are the other 2? Assay reached into her field pack and produced a data drive. "The 3rd, she said, is a reproductive synchrony pattern in 3 apparently unrelated species that suggests they share a common environmental trigger. The trigger appears to be a chemical signal produced by the underground water channel system at specific seasonal intervals. If the pattern holds, it means the water channels are not just a geological feature. They're an active ecological coordinator for the entire jungle system." She set the drive on the table. "The 4th, she said, is more complicated." Everyone looked at her. "Based on the zone structure and the distribution patterns of the fauna I've been able to observe," she said carefully, I believe the Vareth jungle contains a significantly larger population of the apex predator species than the current survey records indicate. She paused. The current records show approximately 40 individuals. My ground observation data suggests the actual population is closer to 300. The room was very quiet. 300, Vessal said. The current maps show most of the jungle's interior as territory the apex predators don't use, Asay said. The current maps are wrong about the interior. The apex predators are using it extensively. She paused. They're not apex predators with a struggling population. They're apex predators in a healthy population who have been effectively invisible because we didn't know where to look. Another silence. Then the Horian researcher said, slowly, "You were in that jungle for 15 days. Yes," Asay said. "With a healthy population of apex predators that no one knew existed, yes." The Horian looked at her. "Were you at any point in danger from them?" Asay considered the question honestly. "Once," she said, "on day 7. A juvenile investigated my camp." She paused. I had chosen the camp location based on the zone map because it was a community boundary point, which I expected the apex predators to avoid for territorial reasons. I was correct about the species-level behavior. I was incorrect that the juvenile would follow adult territorial conventions. She paused. It left after approximately 40 minutes. The room's silence had a new quality. "What did you do during those 40 minutes?" Rethvar said, from where he had been standing at the room's edge. Asay looked at him. "I stayed still and let it make its assessment," she said. "It concluded I was not prey and not a threat." She paused. I may have been incorrect about the not threat part, but its conclusion was accurate enough that it left, which was the relevant outcome. The Horian researcher said, very quietly, "You stayed still for 40 minutes while an unknown apex predator assessed you. The species makes assessment-based decisions rather than instinctive threat responses," Asay said. "Responding with movement or aggression would have changed the assessment." She shrugged slightly. "Staying still was the correct decision based on the behavioral data I had collected over the previous days." Rethvar looked at her for a long moment. Then, he said, in the tone of a man who had been in search and rescue for 19 years and was revising several foundational assumptions, "Dr. Asay, had you ever been in physical danger in a wilderness environment before this?" She thought about it. "Yes," she said, "several times." "And how did you learn to respond to it the way you responded to that?" She looked at him. "The same way I learned to read the jungle," she said. "From people who knew how." The formal report on the Vareth jungle survey findings was submitted to the Concordance Survey Authority for months after Asay's return from the field. It was co-authored by Asay and the field station's full scientific staff, who had spent those for months processing the data, validating the zone model against existing records, and conducting follow-up surveys using the new navigation framework. The follow-up surveys were conducted by teams of 2 using the zone map as their primary navigation tool. The teams did not get lost. In 37 collective days in the jungle's interior, using a map that had not existed 5 months ago, none of the survey teams required search and rescue intervention. The apex predator population count was revised from 42 to 287 confirmed individuals. The presumed extinct ground, Funa, was reclassified as extant and was added to the Survey Authority's active conservation tracking list. 6 of the unknown botanical species were formally described and named. Asay declined to have any of them named after her, which was offered, and suggested names based on the zone locations where they had been found. The Botanical Committee overruled her on one of them, which was designated Vareth Asay in the formal taxonomy, and she accepted this with good grace. The zone map was classified as a primary navigation resource for all future Vareth jungle operations and was integrated into the Survey Authority's standard field kit for HFY researchers. The report's executive summary included a section that Commander Vessal had written herself, which she had titled Methodological Notes, and which was, for an executive summary, unusually personal in tone. It said, in part, the discoveries documented in this report were made possible by a methodological approach that our standard survey protocols did not anticipate and did not produce. Dr. Assay spent 7 years constructing a predictive model of the Vareth jungle's internal structure from external observation. Data. And then validated that model through direct field observation under conditions that our safety protocols would not have authorized. We want to note clearly that our safety protocols are not wrong. They exist to protect researchers in environments where the researcher's level of preparation is unknown, and they work as designed for that purpose. What they did not account for was a researcher whose level of preparation was sufficient to make the standard protocols unnecessary. The standard protocols were designed for researchers who do not know the jungle. Dr. Assay knew it before she entered it. The fact that she had never physically been inside it was, in the context of her specific preparation, genuinely irrelevant. We are not recommending that future researchers bypass safety protocols. We are recommending that future safety assessments include an evaluation of the specific preparation and knowledge base of the individual researcher, rather than applying a universal standard that treats all researchers as equivalently inexperienced. The distinction matters. It mattered here in the following specific way if the standard protocols had been enforced. The discoveries in this report would not have been made on this timeline. Possibly not at all. Vessal had debated including that last paragraph. She had kept it because it was true, and she believed, as a scientist, that true things were worth saying even when they were inconvenient. Assay was back in the jungle 6 months later, this time with a team of 4 and explicit Survey Authority authorization for an extended survey of the Eastern Zone system, which her model predicted would contain additional unknown species, communities. The prediction was correct. It was correct in the specific, detailed way that models built on 7 years of careful work tend to be correct. Rethvar ran a training session for his search and rescue teams before the survey began, using the zone map as a teaching tool. He had spent 3 months learning to read it, not to the level that Assay could, but enough to use it operationally. He had taught his 2 senior team members to do the same. On the 3rd day of the survey, one of the junior researchers took a wrong turn at a zone transition and became disoriented. She activated her beacon. Rethvar's team located her in 40 minutes. Using the zone map to predict which transition zone she was most likely to have exited into based on the direction she had been traveling. In previous years, a disoriented researcher in the Vareth jungle's interior, without a specific location, signal took an average of 3 days to locate. 40 minutes! He filed a training report afterward noting the result. In the operational notes section, he wrote, "Zone map navigation is trainable with moderate investment of time. Recommend mandatory training for all field station personnel." He paused over the report, thinking about what else was worth saying. Then he wrote, "Also recommend that future researcher safety assessments include a conversation with the researcher about what they actually know, rather than what the standard protocol assumes they know." He thought about Assay coming out of the jungle on day 15, carrying specimens in a vessel she had constructed in the field, looking like someone who had been somewhere she understood. He added, "The jungle does not know the difference between a researcher who has been in it before and one who has mapped it so thoroughly from the outside that the inside is already familiar. Neither, it turns out, should we." He submitted the report. Outside, on the perimeter road, Assay's survey team was preparing for the next day's work. Spreading the zone map on a portable table and discussing the eastern approach with the focused pleasure of people who had a good map and knew how to use it. Asay was standing slightly to the side of the group, looking at the jungle edge. She had that expression she sometimes had when she looked at it, the one that was less composed and more genuine. She was reading it even from Eddie. The jungle said the same things it always said, in the language of root systems, and water flow and light angles, and the biological signatures of 3 million square kilometers of extremely active ecosystem. She understood every word.